CBS 42 reporter Rebecca Taylor is a former criminal trial attorney.
There was no physical evidence that would link him to the crime scene. No DNA, no fingerprints. Have a defendant who is black, a victim who is white, and so was the jury that sent Rodney Reed to death row.
It happens the same week the Brown family filed this. It is a federal civil rights lawsuit.
And it's important to remember that the crux of the case against Michael Scott was his confession. Remember, there was no physical evidence that would link him to the crime scene. No DNA, no fingerprints. A lot of that trace evidence was destroyed in the fire. What prosecutors had was his confession. 18 hours of videotaped and audiotaped conversations with police. All of that was shown to the jurors during that 6-week trial. In that confession, he implicated himself not only in the murders, but admitted that he was the one that set their bodies on fire.
So, Rebecca, why do you think the jury came up with 55 years?
Well, Ron and Judy, I think it was somewhat maybe of a compromise among the jurors, trying to figure out what that number should be and also what the goal of sentencing should be. You know, the defense really trying to get the jury to focus on rehabilitation as the goal. They tried to put on the high school friends and the family to show here was a salvageable young man with no history of violence, but a debilitating alcohol and drug addiction. I think the jurors weren't just looking at rehabilitation. They were looking at deterrence. They wanted a lengthy sentence to make sure Colton Petoniak couldn't hurt anyone again for a very long time.
Talk about what you would see as the defense in this case.
Well, I think the defense is going to hang its hat on this confession. Can they really rely on this confession? It is important to note that while the murders happened back in 1991, the confession of Michael Scott didn't happen until 8 years later. That's when they had a cold case task force that was formed. So the statements from Michael Scott and the statements, in fact, from Springsteen didn't come in until 8 years later. So there are some inconsistencies between what they have to say and what the evidence was at the crime scene. So obviously the defense is going to try to get the jury to focus on all of those inconsistencies. It is that word, intentionally, that defense attorneys are hanging their hat on, and here's why.
Petoniak claims hard liquor and a handful of Xanax robbed him of his memory the night he admits he pulled the trigger and killed Jennifer Cave.
I have no idea what happened that night.
His answers on the stand, a series of I don't knows and I don't remember.
Who put those hands in the bag?
I don't know.
How long did it take to cut off her head?
I don't know.
How long did it take to cut off her hands?
I don't know.
But since the trial began, prosecutors have been trying to shore up testimony to show Petoniak is lying about just how drunk and how high he really was.
Did he seem intoxicated on drugs or alcohol to you?
No.
Okay.
Questioning witnesses who saw him that night and the hardware store owner who sold him a hacksaw the morning after.
I smelled alcohol, but he didn't act intoxicated, no.
That's important because to get a murder conviction, prosecutors have to prove Petoniak intended to kill Cave. But there are no eyewitnesses here, and prosecutors have offered no real motive for murder, even though the defendant has offered no real explanation of what happened. By all accounts, the Connolly home was in turmoil. The couple was divorcing, and Dana Connolly sought a protective order against her husband in September after she claimed he choked her unconscious and threatened to kill her. She was only at home the day of the attack to pick up her belongings.
A lot of times, whenever a person leaves a dangerous or abusive relationship, that's the time where it becomes most dangerous.
Dana Connolly did what victims of domestic violence are supposed to do. She told people. But did she tell the right people? On Thursday, she came here to the Travis County Sheriff's Office to tell detectives her story. That very day, they launched both a criminal investigation and an internal affairs investigation. The next day, the unthinkable happened.
Sometimes we run out of time.
So why didn't the sheriff's office launch an investigation back in September when a judge granted that order finding Julius Connolly posed a danger to his family? Because they didn't know about it. The order was a civil order, not a criminal one, so it never showed up on the sheriff's criminal database.
Had this case occurred in Travis County, even with an ex parte protective order, our agency probably would have found out about it and been able to initiate that internal affairs investigation.
In her affidavit, Dana Connolly claimed her husband had abused her many times, but she never filed criminal charges because she didn't want him to lose his job.
Unfortunately, when you do that, there is a disconnect. There is no communication between the courts and the law enforcement. And because of that disconnect, there wasn't a good communication between agencies to be able to do anything about this.
Now investigators are trying to figure out what, if anything, could have been done differently.
In court today, you understand why authorities are calling this the worst case of child abuse Hays County has ever seen. Kids who to this day are afraid of the dark, who aren't able to run and jump like other kids, children who only have to look in a mirror to be reminded of what was done to them and who did it. Now, this is some video we shot of Carmona's home in Dripping Springs, where his children were taken back in 2006. They were covered in bruises with more than 100 bite marks between them. And today we heard from the children's new foster mother, who painted a long road of recovery ahead. 4- and 5-year-old children, some who can't walk upstairs because of the broken bones, others so malnourished they are so small they can't ride a tricycle because their little legs can't reach the pedals. It was graphic testimony, so graphic even Carmona's attorney said she found it moving. Now, all 3 of those children are in a foster home, along with a 4th child who the mother delivered behind bars. Sarah Amaya is awaiting trial later this year on similar charges.
For years, John Coffey has stayed mostly silent, despite cries of racism, police brutality, even murder. Now that the investigations are complete, the lawsuits are over, and his police chief is gone, he wants to tell his side of the story.
Did you shoot to kill?
Yes,
Why?
because that's what we're trained to do.
He makes no apologies for firing the fatal round that killed the 23-year-old mother of 2, and he is tired of being labeled as the cop who killed Sophia King. He wants people to remember him for the life he saved, not the life he took.
It's never, that's the officer that saved Miss Powell. It's always the officer who shot Miss King.
The story begins 4 years ago, a morning in June and a commotion at an East Austin housing project. A veteran cop and a woman tortured by mental illness, where black meets white and life meets death.
The call originally was a woman walking around in a complex with a knife in her hand. Her second step on the grass, she reached behind, pulled out a 8-inch, 9-inch butcher knife. I sprinted about 30 feet, drew my weapon, told her to stop, drop the knife, stop, drop the knife.
Coffey says he went for his weapon only after King tried to turn the blade on apartment manager Diana Powell.
Mrs. Powell had fallen on the ground on her back. Mrs. King jumped between her legs on her knees, raised the knife up, told her again to stop, and the knife started to come down, so I had to shoot.
Injustice anywhere! Injustice everywhere!
He says critics who argue he should have aimed for her wrist watch too much television.
When you're talking about, well, we're going to shoot to wound or to shoot the knife out of their hand, which just isn't realistic, you're also betting what? You're betting that the person on the ground that's fixing to be killed, you're betting with their lives. Because if you're wrong, or it doesn't stop the threat, they pay the price for it.
Lauren Hall outside court fielding questions about his daughter behind bars.
And we just hope that justice prevails, because that's what the country's all about, isn't it?
While our cameras catch Jennifer Cave's mother sounding off. Today's hearing was to decide if mistakes made at trial could have changed Laura Hall's fate. Prosecutors insist Hall, who kept quiet at trial, belongs behind bars.
She could have taken the witness stand. She could have said how Colton Petoniak terrorized her. She could have said how she saw the body and didn't do anything. She could have given any number of reasons, except they would have all been lies.
But Lauren Hall claims his daughter is just another of Petoniak's victims, despite the pictures of her smiling with the convicted killer in Mexico, where the couple fled after the murder.
I'm not going to say that, you know, she's totally innocent of going to Mexico with Petoniak, 'cause she did go. But there's reasons why you do things to protect yourself.
While Sharon Cave says she's the one who could need protecting if Hall is let loose.
So yes, do I have fears for my children, for us? Yeah, I do.
Claiming Hall is unsafe and unstable.
Obviously, the girl is mentally incapacitated. As witnessed just now, apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Now a court will try to sort out the truth.
And they called my name, Hall. You're out of here. And I was like,
Laura Hall out of jail and taking aim at the man she blames for putting her there.
I think he's slime. I think he's a sociopath. And I think he manipulated me. I think he suckered me in from the very beginning, as a matter of fact. You know, I fell in love with him.
Hall claims she was young and stupid in 2005 when she fell for a smart and sexy National Merit Scholar with a dangerous addiction to drugs and alcohol. But prosecutors and the press have painted a different picture of Hall as the cold and callous woman whose obsessive interest in Colton Petoniak led to an unthinkable crime. A dark persona that was perpetuated by her lack of emotion displayed during her trial.
One of the things I do when I get nervous is I clam up and I want to hide it and I want to be strong and I want them to see that I am confident, that, you know, I'm in control here.
It was that controlling and calm demeanor that fueled the state's portrait of her as a menacing, unremorseful felon, even though she insists it was all a facade. To understand the interest in Jimmy Finnell's case, you have to go back 12 years to 1996 when his then fiancée Stacey Stites was murdered. Her body dumped along a roadside in Bastrop County. Rodney Reed now on death row for that crime, but could today's conviction change that?
I certainly hope it means that Rodney Reed's case will be reopened.
Reed supporters who have long insisted he was railroaded have long wanted Finnell, then a Giddings police officer, investigated for the crime. But today some are just wondering how Finnell skirted a possible 200-year prison sentence and why the DA, who's touted as being tough on crime, let it happen.
That's a good question, and this is a really complex case about some difficulties that you have with victims that are chosen by rogue officers, and I'll be able to talk more about those circumstances and why we got to the point we are today after sentencing next week.
Speculation circulating about whether the Georgetown Police Department should have handled the investigation of one of their own.
Are you concerned at all with how the investigation was conducted?
Those are good hints, and I think that they're accurate suggestions about some of the issues that are present in this case.
But hints are all we have, and Bradley would not confirm whether that investigation jeopardized any physical evidence that could have been crucial to this case.